Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I'm doing the third and final part of my series on how to deal with astrological anxiety. So, in today's episode, we're going to talk about the difference between the astrologer, the querent, and the student, or the astrologer, the person consulting the astrologer, sometimes called the querent, and the student of astrology. In each of these three roles, astrological anxiety appears in a slightly different way and has to be dealt with and approached in a slightly different manner. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Before I go into that, I want to remind all of you that my new class is coming up soon. So, my first year program is called Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic, and you can check it out on my website, nightlightastrology.com. If you go to the courses page, click on the first year course. My second year course and horary program also begin in the month of June. This is a 1 year program. It includes about 100 hours worth of classroom content that I teach live on Zoom webinars. They're all recorded and kept for you. So if you need to correspond because the class time doesn't work out, you can always watch the videos at your own time and in your own pace. You have a total of 2 years within which to take the final certification exam. There's also an abundance of guest lectures, optional homework, quizzes, reading assignments, and group forums and breakout study sessions that we hold. I'm available all year round for students to ask questions to. There's an early bird payment available. You save about $500 off when you pay up front for the course. There's a payment plan if you need it. And there's also need based tuition for people who might be in need because of things like being a part time only worker or, being out of work at the moment, or maybe you're a single parent or something like that. So take advantage of it if it'll help. We always try to make sure that everything's really accessible for people. So, that being said, let's dive into this third and final part of our series. There are three different people who basically consume or consider astrological content. And I'm not going to consider people who are just passersby, window shoppers, just looking as they pass by. That's interesting. Maybe that leads to one of these three categories later. But the three categories as I see them are the astrologer, the consumer of astrology, which we call the querent, the person asking the question of the astrologer. The question could be very general. What do you see in my birth chart? What is my birth chart? What stands out to you in my birth chart? Like, people ask me that all the time. But it could be something very specific, like, will I get pregnant? Or do you see me getting married? Or how is my compatibility with this person I'm dating, or something like that? So you have the astrologer, the person doing the astrology. You have the querent, the person asking something of the astrologer. And then you have the student of astrology, the person studying astrology, however formally or informally, with either the intention to practice or with the desire to learn more about astrology because it's a hobby or a personal interest or whatever the case might be. So, each of these different categories, it's important to understand, first of all, that many of us fall into several of these categories at once. For example, during any given year, I'm consulting with people literally every day, like easily over 1,000 people a year that I work with. um, or at the same time, so maybe at least several times a year, I'm in the position of asking something of the oracle, asking something of my birth chart, or using a horary for myself or something like that. So there'll be times in which I'm an astrologer, but I'm also asking a question and approaching maybe another astrologer. uh, and then finally, there are students of astrology. Now, most astrologers are perpetual students, and yet they are different roles, and they have certain different kinds of anxiety that go along with them that a person can deal with. And then there's different ways of trying to deal with that anxiety. Why it comes up and how to deal with it is different for each of these categories. So let's break it down. First of all, let's talk about the astrologer. First and foremost, the astrologer is a student of the symbol. Uh, this by the symbol, we mean the symbolic language, the symbols of astrology, whether it's a house, a sign, a planet, an aspect, a dignity, a fixed star, a lot, whatever the case might be. We are students of symbols. By studying symbols, the astrologer for thousands of years has also been primarily interested in using symbols as a way of ascertaining the source beyond or within or behind the symbol, which means that the study of the symbol is a spiritual exercise that's being done for the sake of drawing closer to some kind of divine symbol maker or the divine intelligence in nature that is the ground of all of these symbols, or that is the personal source of the symbols, however you'd like to think about it. By studying the symbol, we find the source of the symbol. And this is something that you will see ancient astrologers and philosophers talking about. Um, so, the world, when you study symbols with this spiritual intention of understanding the divine intelligence behind and within the symbols, and remember that the symbols aren't just mechanical, like blueprint language in some kind of mechanistic universe. The symbols are the evidence of something divine speaking with us, whether those are the gods, the planets, or Godhead, the source itself, speaking to us. We are also looking through the study of symbol to draw closer to divinity. And that is at the source of astrology. That's at the roots of astrology, I should say. The world becomes a moving series of images, myths, symbols, metaphors, analogies that shine or shimmer with the light of divinity the more that you study them. And that's actually the spiritual intention of the astrologer. That is the number one thing that the astrologer is interested in. And that is the number one thing that the astrologer is hoping that the querent, their client, will gain by virtue of visiting with the astrologer. So even though the astrologer is going to address the past, the present, or the future through the symbols, the hope is that the querent, or the one inquiring, will come to understand and see that divine intelligence in their life through the symbols. More on this in a second. We're not interested in astrologers as getting things right, meaning accurate predictions. We're very happy, of course, if we do make accurate predictions. It's very satisfying. No one's going to deny that. However, what we're interested is not in getting something right as in a demonstration of our own personal powers, or of the, what do I want to say, of the merits of the technical, of the techniques, or something like that. We're not interested in getting it right. We're interested in the symbol. So, what is the symbol? And you could choose a different word too. I don't want to quibble too much about it, but I'm using the word symbol today. So, let's talk about symbol. What is the etymology of the word symbol? Creed, summary, religious belief, from late Latin symbolum, creed, token, or mark. So, when you think about reading symbols, what we're really getting at is this idea that they are the evidence. Symbols become the evidence of something intangible. And for many people, the word symbol has been a way of pointing to something beyond. A symbol embodies and points beyond itself. It is like the dove, coming down with the branch. There's a way of understanding that spirit has descended into some form and speaks through it, and it indicates it is a creed, a token, or a mark of something beyond. From the Greek symbolon, and I'm probably mispronouncing this, so I apologize. Token, watchword, a sign by which one infers, a ticket, a permit, or a license. Okay, so we know that. Also, what I really like is a mark. A mark, something that, if, for example, my daughters love to come up to me when they're doing their coloring with their markers, and they love to mark my arms and my hands. They like to come up to me and say, "Can I mark you?" And then throughout the day, if they've done that, they'll come back to me and they'll say, look, 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 see, there's where I marked you earlier. So they know that I am marked by, to know that I'm walking around marked by them means a lot to them. It means something for me to bear the impression that they've left upon me, and to even bear it proudly, or to say, "Ooh, I really like this," So similarly, what are we doing with symbolism? What we're trying to do is help people see that their life has been marked by God. that God's little coloring crayons have come in and marked your life. And so when we understand that there's this idea of a symbol marking us with something, that it gives it is association with religious belief, or that we've been touched by something beyond. Now, of course, it can be used in a very mundane way to say this is symbolic, or this symbolizes this thing. But if you really deeply think about the general idea of symbolism, it always carries that almost religious or spiritual connotation where we're marked or touched beyond something. Yes, there's an appearance, but the appearance is emblematic of something beyond, something that has touched and marked us. Astrologers are not interested in getting it right. We are interested in the mark. We're interested in the touch. We're interested in being touched by symbol, and we're interested in helping others to have the experience of being touched by symbol. When you're touched by symbol, it is just as joyful and simple and naive and sweet, and yet so profoundly meaningful. Uh, just like a little child marking you with their magic marker. To give that experience to someone, it's so powerful that they walk around their life, and even if it's something as simple as, hey, I'm having a week where, I feel crummy, and but you're marked. That experience is marked. As you can imagine what joy you feel, if you're sick or something like that, and your kids come up to you and they while you're sick, they bring you something. It could be this, the world's silliest thing. Maybe they bring you like a coaster from from your coffee table or something, and they're like, here, I think this will make you feel better. It becomes that little, you might end up taking that little cup holder. I randomly just randomly came up with the idea of a cup holder or a coaster. You take that coaster and you hold it while you're sick in bed with your cold for 2 days or whatever, and you think, they're with me. Do you see what I mean? So, in the same way, the astrologer is not interested in getting it right. We're not interested in techniques. We're not primarily interested in history. We're not primarily interested in academics. We are interested in being touched, in being marked, and we're interested in symbol. And so this is this and not anxiety about technique, not anxiety about getting it right, not anxiety about the future, not anxiety about the past, and not anxiety about the present, but interest in the symbol, in the mark, in being touched by something. Because if you're touched by something, like my kids could give me something, like like they could give me something that I might find sort of useless, or I might scratch my head at. But if they're giving it to me in love, then it is the most meaningful little thing I could have with me. And so, similarly, in our lives, we may not understand why the signs and symbols speak the way that they do, and sometimes it may even appear like they're there, and they're sort of increasing our anxiety because they're not what we want, or that the events of our lives aren't what we hope for or expect. But if we learn to see things symbolically, then it doesn't matter, because we're marked and we're touched. And again, that's what the astrologer is interested in. That's what the astrologer is interested in giving to other people. Another etymological association with symbol, that which is thrown or cast together, from like a togetherness, thrown or cast together. Also, the idea of throwing things together. So, another thing that astrologers are interested in doing is in taking the experiences of our lives and throwing them that would appear. It's interesting because you can see the way in which um, divination has its roots in the appearance of chance. It's not chance per se, it's the appearance of chance. It's the meaningful relationship with chance that divination purposefully participates in. The casting of dice, the casting of lots, the random casting of a horary chart, the seemingly random moment of birth. What you know who knows exactly when the bell will strike and the baby will appear. These apparently chance-like moments, it feels in the moment, because there's a suddenness and an unexpectedness to it, that things are being thrown together. And yet when things are thrown together, there's still a togetherness. There's something that brings the chance together when we say we decide it is significant, which is akin to saying it is good. And so when things are thrown together, we purposefully in astrology we mark it with symbols, and the chance like nature of life comes together and bears a kind of coherence. And so symbol is, we're interested in symbol because we're interested in the meaningful relationship with the chance occurrences in life. We're interested in bringing those chance occurrences together. So symbol means thrown together. It's something really beautiful to contemplate for a while. So let's go back to our little mantras. We are not interested in getting things right. We are interested in the symbol, in the mark, in the touch. We are not interested in solving our past lives. We are not interested in um, version 2.0 of our karmic best self in this life and all these instructions we have to figure out to get things right and improve and level up in this lifetime compared to a previous lifetime. We are not interested in solving anything from the past, the present, or the future. We are interested in the touch. We are interested in the mark. We are interested in the symbol. We are interested right now in finding meaningful ways to let the universe color on us with its magic markers. And the astrologer is the one, the storyteller, the web weaver, the myth holder, the bard, the singer, the songwriter, the one who understands this different kind of music that can bring that touch into our lives regardless, and is the instant healing for anything, instantly dismisses all of this overly literalizing overly literal ideas about our past and our future with regard to karma and things we have gotten wrong and things we have to correct. No, we're not interested in any of that. Astrology really hasn't ever been interested in all of that. It's been interested in the mark or the touch of the divine through the symbol, and the meaningful instructions that we can also receive when trying to live a life through symbols. So remember that for people like Plato, this world that we live in is a world of images and appearances. If we study them in as they bear resemblance to the Ade, the eternal ideas in the mind of God, the eternal archetypal forms, the logos, uh, the heavenly images, then everything in this world relates back to it, and so everything bears the mark or touch of the divine. And broadly speaking, if we don't have that in our lives, then we're living in a world of appearances that have no rootedness. And the roots, like the Bhagavad Gita, pictures this world as a tree that's upside down. We're in the branches, and the roots are upward. Isn't that beautiful? So that the roots are actually heavenly. And weirdly enough, the more that you are able to see this world of appearances in terms of these eternal archetypes, the more rooted your experience in this world becomes. It's more embodied in a divine way. That's a paradox, because it would almost it again, it flips it on its head. That's why you see again in the Gita the picture of the universe as a tree with its roots upward, same exact way that James Hillman describes the world and the growth of the soul in his book The Soul's Code. He talks about rooting upward, and as opposed to the roots of the tree being down in the ground. That's really, really beautiful way of thinking about it, because if we understand, again, if we understand our lives and the movements of our lives through all of the images, myths, metaphors, and symbols of the eternal, it is really hard not to feel that you're just one. Did you guys ever read? There was this book called The Illustrated Man, and it was by Ray Bradbury. I read it a long time ago, but he had like tattoos like all over his body. Or if you've ever seen, if you have kids, you know this movie Moana. So Maui, the demigod, has like moving tattoos all over his body, and like that's what life is when you live with symbol. That's what it becomes, and you don't. It almost becomes, when you live that way, it becomes you're eternal, so it becomes irrelevant what's happened in the past, the present, or the future, in a sense. I mean, it's not that it becomes irrelevant as in there's no meaning in it, or there's no meaning in learning and growing and so on and so forth. It's just that you also recognize that um whatever stories you're living, it's far more important that you just be feeling that you're touched and that um, you're rooting in the divine the whole time. The more that you're doing that, the more open you are to receiving the guest of your own experience. So at any rate, in The Silver Chair, which is my favorite Narnia book, The Silver Chair is the moon book. It was the book that C.S. Lewis imbued with the alchemical symbolism of the moon, according to medieval astrologers who he really admired. Um, uh, the silver chair is, of course, a moon image, a silver being the metal of the moon. At the beginning of the book, before the heroine in the book, Jill, um, goes down into Narnia to go seeking after a lost prince, she receives instructions from Aslan as to how to navigate this adventure that she's going to have in Narnia. Here's what he says. He gives her a series of instructions and he says, follow these signs. When you're down there, all these things are gonna happen. This adventure is gonna play out. It's very harrowing. You're gonna have a crisis of doubt. All these things are gonna come up, but here are the signs to watch for. So he says this. He says, remember, remember, remember the signs. Say them to yourself when you wake in the morning and when you lay down at night and when you wake in the middle of the night. And whatever strange things may happen to you, let nothing turn your mind from following the signs. And secondly, I give you a warning. Here on the mountain I have spoken to you clearly. I will not often do so down in Narnia. Here on the mountain the air is clear and your mind is clear. As you drop down into Narnia, the air will thicken. Take great care that it does not confuse your mind. And the signs which you have learned here will not look at all like you expect them to look when you meet them there. That is why it is so important to know them by heart and pay not attention to appearances. Remember the signs and believe the signs. Nothing else matters. This could very well be the creed of astrologers. Replace sign with symbol. By the way, the ancient word for, we have literally the same word being used, a sign, like a symbol or an omen. Remember, let's break this down little by little and show the archetypal parallels to what we do as astrologers. Remember, remember, remember the signs. Say them to yourself when you wake in the morning and when you lay down at night and when you wake in the middle of the night. This is the equivalent of a mantra. So learning the astrological language, learning the combinations of houses, planets, signs, letting your life be permeated with the different combinations of symbols, images, myths, and metaphors is the equivalent of a kind of mantra that you're learning. It's not quite the same as a literal mantra that you might sit down and repeat with beads, which is also a very good idea if you're an astrologer, by the way, to have a spiritual practice like that. And we'll talk about that later. But we are in the repetitive movement. We are circumambulating our lives by, and we're as we walk around our lives, we're reciting this symbolic language. And the reason we get to walk around our own lives and be like a devotional participant, hosting the guest of our own experiences, hosting the gods as our experiences, is as we circumambulate around our lives, we get to do so because we're following the planets that are circumambulating in the heavens. So when we follow the planets, we circumambulate our own lives and we become the host of our own experiences because we see them as gods. We see them as these Ade, these eternal ideas. And when we're doing that, we have to remember the signs. We have to train ourselves to see the signs, to know the signs, to love the signs. And our goal is not to be right. It's not about technique. It's not about philosophy. It's not about having some special mystical powers or abilities. It is about the sign and being marked by the sign and being a devotional attendee to the signs. And then it's about giving other people the experience of the signs, because when other people remember the signs and learn to remember the signs, that's what an astrologer is giving you. And that the very essence of that is to alleviate anxiety that we have caught up in a world of appearances that, without an understanding of their eternal nature in the realm of the gods and in the realm of the Ade, we're lost. We really get lost. And then Aslan warns about this. He says, whatever strange things may happen to you, let nothing turn your mind from following the signs. Look for them. In other words, don't get lost. Don't get confused. Secondly, I give you a warning. Here on the mountain, I have spoken to you clearly. I will not often do so in Narnia. Here on the mountain, the air is clear and your mind is clear. As you drop down into Narnia, the air will thicken. When we study astrology, we're on the mountain. We're in that position of sages, hermits, contemplatives. Remember, that's a very Saturnine thing to study astrology. Ficino, famous Renaissance astrologer, said that. And Dante, who gave the seventh sphere of heaven to contemplatives. It's a very Saturn-like thing. We have to, in a sense, distance ourselves, remove ourselves from the world, have a certain degree of detachment that we cultivate. Because if we're only studying from the place of anxiety and connection and attachment to outcomes in the world, it's really hard to be a student of astrology. The astrologer is one who's cultivated a certain kind of distance and detachment. They've heard the signs on the mountain somewhere. They go to the mountain deliberately. They live and practice and work from that space deliberately all the time. And when we're on that mountaintop space, things are very clear. It's very easy to understand. And we have to have that space. Why? Because we're also worldly beings who are going to talk with, work with, and ourselves will be people caught up in the world of appearances where the air is thicker, denser. It's easier to be confused. The signs don't always appear in the way that we think they will. They're actually much harder to predict than we think they are. So, but we need that as astrologers, we are that little mountaintop oracle that people have to walk all day to get to. Metaphorically speaking, we are the proverbial perch, like the hermit card in tarot. We're bringing people that space to get some distance so we can remember, oh yes, the air is clearer now. I remember I'm a spirit soul. I'm traveling through the world. I have to remember the signs. I'm on a journey. I remember the signs, remember the signs, remember the signs. The astrologer is doing that for people. And the point is to alleviate anxiety. So if once we go back into the world, the air thickens, take great care that the thickness of air does not confuse your mind. So we need these practices, we need these symbols because the world will tend to confuse our mind. The signs which you have learned here will not look at all like you expect them to look when you meet them there. That is why it is so important to know them by heart and not pay attention to appearances. Remember in an earlier episode, I read from you Firmicus Maternus's message to the student, and he says, at the end of the day, it's not what you learn in these books. It's when you commit them to memory and they go into your heart, and the process of making yourself more like the divine. When your life becomes in pursuit of some kind of communion with the divine, and you take on the adornments of virtue and you study these things, it's not so much what you will have learned in books, although that's important, but it's not so much what you will have learned in books, but it's the divinity that will have come into your heart and mind and the way you see the world that will be how you speak and perform this art for others. Firmicus explicitly says that to students. That is why it is so important to know them by heart and not pay attention to appearances. Remember the signs and believe the signs. Nothing else matters. So this is the realm of appearances. Ancient astrologers called it the sublunary realm. And literally it was thought of as a denser place. So Lewis, remember, this is the book themed on the moon, the silver chair. And he's talking about the sublunary world and how to take these higher perceptions and how to follow signs and omens down in that world where it's very easy to get lost in appearances. The correct alchemization of the moon in astrology, in other words, is the ability to see the world as a shimmering emblem or symbol of the divine. Just like the moon is not the original light, a reflective light, but it's been touched. The moon is the ultimate symbolic planet because it itself is the carrier, the mirror of a light that is not its own. And that's what a symbol is. That's what a symbol does. That's what the little magic marker on my arm does. It's not the magic marker literally. It's what it points me toward. So similarly, the astrologer is here in the world of appearances to see the truth and to remember the signs and to remember the symbols. So first of all, if that is our mission, anxiety and attachment to appearances and outcomes, or to fixing things from some kind of broken, terrible past life, or anything like that is not it. We're getting lost if we do that. Now, we may unintentionally do that. We may unintentionally get involved in that, and it may be part of the path to get involved in those things. But we have to keep coming home to the core spiritual purpose of astrology. Remember, remember, remember the signs. Say them to yourself when you wake in the morning, when you lay down at night, when you wake in the middle of the night. Whatever strange things may happen to you, let nothing turn your mind from following the signs. Remember the signs and believe the signs. Nothing else matters. That is what the astrologer is about. Now, the querent. The querent is the person approaching the astrologer. The querent is in the valley of life, in the dense air of the sublunary realm, caught up in the world of appearances and anxious about them, by nature, anxious about them. You don't approach an astrologer unless you have some anxiety about where you're at in the board game of life, and you're looking for a sign. You're looking for symbols. What people don't always understand consciously is that what they're seeking for is to be touched or marked, to come back to some kind of meaningful symbolic orientation that helps them feel like they are walking home, they're following the breadcrumb trails, they have not forgotten, the air has gotten clear again, if only for a moment, and the signs are guiding them back homeward. Homeward to the heart, not to some literal destination where you level up because you've mastered your north node or whatever the case might be. No. A querent is missing signs and symbols. They're missing that feeling of being marked or touched. And it can happen to anyone. It can happen to the astrologer. In fact, the astrologer is often the querent. And so it's not as though the astrologer is always sitting on the mountain, just, I've got all of the clarity in the world. No, the astrologer needs astrology because they recognize, the only thing they recognize is that I'm in need of symbolic reorientation constantly. And I'm just maybe I'm slightly more aware of the fact that I need that than others, maybe, but astrologers can be querents. And this is where it gets tricky, because sometimes, and we're going to go into this when we talk about being a student of astrology, but sometimes we're somewhere in between. We might be helping people understand their lives symbolically in one way in our life. We may, because we're so interested in a subject like this, we may be very good at helping people, but on another level, it can scare the crap out of us because we're just as tangled up in the realm of appearances as anyone else. On any given Wednesday, I could be just as entangled as anyone else. So the querent is anyone missing or seeking the signs and symbols, missing or looking for the mark or touch. They can't read them on their own. They can't find them. They're missing them. They can't be objective about them. And they have some anxiety about the world of appearances, most of which will show up in terms of feeling lost, feeling overwhelmed, feeling afraid, desiring something, wondering if you'll get something, wondering if something will be taken away, or just feeling lost and like you need that reorientation to know that you're walking a meaningful path again. Those are the things that people go to astrology for, and there is nothing wrong with going to astrology for that. But the pretext of astrology is existential anxiety. It is anxiety in the world of appearances. In the sublunary realm, we feel lost. We're looking for that orientation. And so astrology is by its nature addressing existential anxiety. So it's okay that there's anxiety involved with astrology. We need to help people find and remember the signs so that the anxiety drops. But this is the big problem for people who are intent upon controlling the world of appearances rather than coming back to that feeling of being marked or touched by the signs and symbols. There's a big problem, because if we falsely believe ourselves the controller of this world and of our destiny, not that we have no participation whatsoever, but if we believe that we're totally in control of it, that there aren't gods and divine forces and laws of karma and nature working with us, and the intersection of our fate with other people's fate and destiny, and the mysterious interaction of free will, if we haven't surrendered to the complexity of all of that yet, we're in big trouble, because If the astrologer comes in and says, look for this sign or symbol, look for this omen, look this myth, this metaphor, this area of life is going to be touched by this god and this sign and symbol around this time, that is fundamentally a helpful thing because it brings us back to our life being touched. But if we are insistent upon only one kind of experience and only one way that we will accept the grace, or if we're well, there's only, like, if my daughter came up to me and I said, um, well, you've brought me a coaster and I really need some Theraflu or something like that, then I will have missed the opportunity to receive the grace, which is the mark or token that I'm being given. So that there's that quote again from Prince Caspian. I've spent so much of my life trying to get back what was taken rather than taking care of what has been given. So when an astrologer, without, astrologers can unintentionally or sometimes intentionally scare people, that's not cool. But if an astrologer is helping us understand the movement of the signs and symbols and the unfolding of destiny and helping us to feel that marker touch, um, and we are going to say, well, that's not the way I was hoping it would go, or that's not what I wanted to hear, or that's not where I want the story to go, then we're not really approaching astrology for the right reasons, and we will not be able to receive the marker touch that's trying to come into our life. So for people who are intent on controlling the world of appearances, who falsely believe themselves to be the controllers of everything, there's nothing worse than someone telling you that there is a plot already waiting, twists and turns already waiting, signs and omens that will appear and guide you in experiences that may not be the ones you choose or want or hope for. For many people, that is terrifying. It might be scary, but it doesn't change the fact that it is worse to go it alone without signs and under the illusion that you're in control of everything and that life sucks if it doesn't turn out the way you want it to. I don't think that the odds are not good that you will be happy living under that kind of paradigm. Our best chance at freedom, if we're interested in freedom, by the way, because some people might, through astrology, they may also feel like, well, I'm fated. There's no choice. Our best chance at freedom, our best chance is to learn how to listen, to learn how to pay attention to and follow the signs. When we listen, pay attention to, and follow the signs, we enter into a cooperative and co-creative relationship with our spiritual guides, the gods, and divinity itself. That's our only chance for real freedom. Otherwise, if so, and I will tell you right now, I don't know how that happens without having to go through the purification of anxiety. There's just no way around it. You can't, the reason that we have anxiety is because we're trying to control everything and because we don't yet recognize the degree to which we have to surrender our sense of being the controllers before we can have freedom. It's like, until we do that, until we learn how to do that, like, of course, astrology is going to make you anxious because the bottom line is that you're not nearly as in control of your life as you think you are. And if you're not going to be, if you can't square with that and trust that there is joy, co-creativity, and greater freedom in moving into that reality, then yeah, you're definitely going to feel like you're screwed, you know. But on the other hand, if you can know, okay, I've got, maybe I have a rough Saturn experience coming, and you don't know exactly what that means, because just like Aslan says, right? He says, what does he say? Very clearly, he says, um, the signs which you have learned here will not look at all like you expect them to look when you meet them there. So another thing that we have to be aware of is that in doing astrology, we're not trying to predict exactly what will happen. Not exactly. What we're trying to, sometimes they're a little bit more concrete than others, but what we're really trying to do is get into a space where we are prepared to see and recognize the signs when they come. So if I sit down with someone and talk about a Saturn experience, there might be some anxiety that's going to come up in hearing that you're about to meet Saturn on the road of life. But my experience is that, like, well, you're going to meet Saturn regardless. So do you want to meet Saturn with a worldview that assumes that you're in control of everything, or do you want to meet Saturn with a worldview that assumes that there are gods on your path who will cross at certain times? Like, I'd rather, like, for me, I'd rather be prepared and be able to be a good host to the gods that I meet. Just like, when I grew up, I remember there's a saying in the Christian church, like, someone comes to your door, and you never know who's coming to your door. If someone's trying to sell you something. I mean, that was back in the day. People don't really come door to door trying to sell you anything anymore, but people come to your door and they knock on the door, and you get so irritated or whatever. You don't know who they are. You act rudely. It's like, no, that was a big no-no in the ancient world, and it is in a spiritual person's life too, because that could be a god. So when we say bad things are going to happen, that's not the way that ancient astrologers were thinking about it. They were thinking more like Saturn stuff is going to happen. And the astrologer is the one who says, I'll take it because I want to bear the mark of divinity in my life. I want to be an attendant to this experience. And I can do that because I'm an immortal, eternal being. Right? So there's my freedom. I have the freedom to be a good host because I'm eternal. So if you want to take away your anxiety, start there and then start thinking about how to host your experiences from the standpoint of your own eternality. But why do we forget that? Because it's a little dense down here. We're caught up in materiality where there is impermanence and where we cling very tightly to our mortal frame. It's just part of the deal, and it's actually a beautiful part of the deal. The more that you understand it, I mean, the more that you age and embrace this worldview of following signs. In my experience, the more that you're like, yeah, my mortality is what makes everything so fragile and sacred. It's so beautiful, and that preparation for a Saturn return or a whatever the case might be, having that preparation becomes a way of um, it's like prom night or something. There's a way that you feel nervous, but in a good way, because you know that there's nothing that divinity couldn't mark you with that isn't just totally beautiful from the standpoint of eternity, which is who and what you are. Okay, so enough on that. The querent is going to have to address existential anxiety. They are there, in a sense, to help get back to a space of trusting and seeing and sensing the signs. And it's actually far more difficult to help people um, go beyond their desire for good things than it is to help them get over their fear of bad things. I find that most of my clients are pretty resilient when it comes to accepting that life has difficult seasons. I find that my clients are much more apt to getting lost and deliriously confused when things are going really well. It's harder because when things are going well, we're like, yeah, well, I deserve it. I've been doing so well, and of course I have a good fate or something like that. We don't think of our success as something that we still need to be a humble servant of. Instead, we tend to get a little high and puffed up on those things. And actually, those are actually often far more dangerous. Anyway, finally, there's the student of astrology. And the student is the mixture between the querent and the astrologer. Most are perpetual students, if we're honest. Like, I'm a perpetual student of astrology as much as I'm an astrologer and sometimes a querent. Ideally, as we evolve in our practice of astrology, we should be compartmentalizing some of these things a little bit. For example, when I first started, I studied my own chart and was more obsessed with my own questions and inquiries and the signs and symbols as they pertained to my own life than I am now, 11 years later. Now, I would say that I very rarely approach astrology for anything personal, although I pay attention to the signs and movements of planets all the time. I just don't go asking or wondering about anything very much anymore. That is something that all astrologers should be aspiring to. That's a good sign of growth. This is what my teachers have told me too. So I'm not just trying to toot my own horn. I'm not perfect either. I still have loads of anxiety that comes up sometimes, especially with my kids and their charts. But the mark of progress over time is that it's okay to study our own charts and to be more in the mode of inquiry for ourselves. But over time, a mark of progress as the student of astrology becomes more of the astrologer. And the astrologer is one who is following the signs as a kind of spiritual practice, and not someone who is as anxious about outcomes and appearances. The anxiety has lessened. And that's actually the purifying effect of astrology. Like, if you want to do astrology, you're going to have to go through a lot of anxiety. It will eventually be very purifying, and you'll find that you don't really approach astrology as much anymore. This breakthrough for me started happening maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I started this mantra in a lot of my videos, telling people, like, you're not your chart, because I was realizing I wasn't my chart, because I was getting some really healthy distance from it for the first time in my career. And that just, like, you hit a threshold like that when you're practicing astrology long enough, where you just go, like, this is a tool that is um you know it's a tool. I don't have to use it obsessively for myself. Now, the compartmentalizing your role as an astrologer versus a querent is really helpful. So being like, look, sometimes I may need to approach, but be really careful and thoughtful about how and when you do it and why. And then, are you going to read yourself, or are you going to approach someone else? A lot of the times, the student of astrology, the biggest mistake is that you're in an echo chamber in your own head, trying to be both the student and master of your own nativity or your own chart. That's really hard to do. And as you go along, getting readings from other astrologers, getting advice or insight from other people, that's going to help a lot, so that you don't feel like you really aren't the best person to be reading your chart. And I know it's like sacrilege to say it, like, well, there's no one that knows me better than me. It's like, yeah, well, there might be people who know the symbols better than you, especially if you're a rookie and you're really, like, hung up still on your own, like, existential angst. Not that we all aren't, but, like, that's the role. That's what an astrologer is supposed to help you do. And when you're a student, you'll often cross those wires a lot, and that can really amplify your anxiety, because you know enough to be dangerous and you're still too self-obsessed. And I'm not trying to say that meanly, like, that's just how it is. So anyway, um, but if we can compartmentalize a little bit too, like, we can say, okay, like even just like this, like, there's a technique. I'd like to sit down and like look at my chart and apply this technique and try to write down a few conclusions. And then I close my computer, I close my book, I close my notebook, like taking very structured time to learn and study techniques and apply them to your chart, and then kind of close that down, rather than being in a spin cycle 24/7 of astrological navel gazing. That's just not going to be healthy for people, and it's going to increase your anxiety. Finally, it helps to work for others more than for yourself at some point. Now, I don't like to condemn looking at your own chart or studying your own chart. I really encourage it for students early on, but looking at other people's charts and reading for other people is where you're going to start getting a lot more of the deeper understanding of symbol, of being marked by symbolism, of learning how to see symbols actively in other people's lives. It helps you to be objective with your own chart. So if you are not working for others more than yourself, at some point with astrology, it becomes really hard to go to, I want to call it like a next level or something. It's not quite the right phrase, but it's hard to, like, mature as an astrologer if at some point you're not reading for other people more than just using it for yourself. Another way of putting it, maybe you're not going to have a professional practice, but it would be that you need to be in the practice of regularly contemplating the symbols in life and in the world outside of your own personal drama, or outside of your own personal, sphere. So even as a kind of contemplative daily exercise, to look at the news, or to reflect upon how you see astrology in different areas of life in a sort of detached manner, almost like a journalist would reflect upon current events or something like that. You need that kind of objective viewing and watching of the symbols, um, because even your own life is a part of the current events. Like, I'm not my ego, I'm not this body, I'm here temporarily, but I need to be able, as an astrologer, my soul has to gain some distance and some ability to observe astrology at work, without the ego, like, attached and invested. So if you can do that reflectively on, I think it's easier to do so in really mundane ways, like watching a moon cycle or watching a quick hitting aspect from Venus or something, and kind of going like, oh, wow, that was really interesting. Inevitably, you're going to be able to reflect upon the symbols of astrology in your day-to-day life. But you need some distance in working for others, or in looking and using the symbols objectively outside of your own self. It is impossible to learn the divinatory art of astrology without reading regularly for others. It's impossible to learn the divinatory art of astrology without tracking your own signs and symbols. And there's a combination of those two things that always have to be happening. Um, I would say, again, as you evolve, less self focus and more focus on a more detached view of things happening around you in the world with the symbols, or a lot of immersion into reading for other people is the best way to mature and grow. One thing that people commonly mistake is that I can know a lot about technique, I can know a lot about philosophy, I can know a lot about history, and that that is good enough. And I guess this is my soapbox where I want to say it's just not. If you are someone who doesn't have the experience of sitting in a live session where you have to be present and attentive to the signs and symbols and help people have that experience of being marked by them through your mind, your speech, and your heart, and your insight into the symbols themselves. You're becoming receptive to the divinity speaking through them. If you don't have that experience regularly, it's really hard to grow and mature as an astrologer. So students have to look for those experiences, because if you don't, one of the things that's happening is you're not really being a student any longer. It's like you're a querent that thinks they're a student, meaning you're constantly asking things of astrology, or you're trying to capitalize on it or get something from it or gain something from it, but you're not putting yourself into that vulnerable position of having to learn how to be a steward of the symbols, how to help people experience them and to feel touched by them. If you're not serving the symbols in some way like that regularly, you're not doing the real thing, in my opinion. And the all of these things will bring up anxiety, because dealing with anxiety we have over the realm of appearances is part of how we're purified. I've said this a few times in this talk. This is even more true for students than for querents who may use astrology very rarely. So again, like, one of the problems with being a student is when you're in student mode, it's like a lot of the times you're a querent, you're someone trying to use astrology for yourself, but you think that you're acting as a student. So there's not healthy compartmentalization or separation between your kind of like student spiritual practice developing and someone who is studying astrology but using it to obsess over something or trying to build a name or fame or career or whatever the other cases might be. Many people who listen to astrology content, I would say, are unconscious or unintentional students of astrology as well. And so the anxiety that astrology can bring into your life is amplified because you're taking on a spiritual path without realizing that that's what you're doing. So, for example, like, people contact me and they're like, I'm listening to a lot of astrology content and like some of it makes me anxious. And I'm like, well, yeah, because you're taking in symbolic language that's helping you to see this higher, the A day. You're taking in something that's helping you see this divine reality, but you're not getting distance from it. And you get distance from it by taking on more formal practices of students and practitioners, and formal training and formal like apprenticeship. And you need the guidance of being able to um, you know recognize, well, it's getting to a point where I guess I'm a student of astrology. Okay, great. And then you need to have some formalizing things to help you make some healthy compartmentalization. If you don't, then you're becoming a student, but you don't know, you don't have the right tools in place to help you deal with the anxiety that can come up from a lot of astrological. So, people are oversaturated with astrology. They don't have enough formal tools to help them make it into a practice, make it a little bit more formal. Formalizing can happen in a bunch of ways. One can be just getting organized and becoming more of a student, setting up your time and your space for different kinds of studies and practices. And you can do that. A lot of people do it on their own. I think obviously finding an astrologer or several astrologers to study with, to study under, to get recommendations for reading and training purposes, to ask questions of astrologers of how to develop professional practice and professionalizing compartment in your life for astrology. So those, sometimes people get anxiety because they're starting to become a student of astrology, but they don't realize it yet, and that's going to amplify. It's sort of like if a person were to start, walking around their neighborhood mindfully, right? And not really realizing that they're practicing walking meditation every day and they're getting deeper and deeper into it. And some they're like, oh my God, all sorts of stuff is coming up. It's like, well, yeah, you're walking around for 3 miles every day meditating and you don't even realize it. So if you're taking in astrological content all the time and you don't realize what you're doing, and you don't have anyone to help you create some healthy differentiation between your astrological content life and the other areas of your life, yeah, it probably will increase your anxiety. The other thing most people don't realize is that if you're taking on a lot of astrological content in your life and yet you don't have a spiritual practice, or there's a lot of other areas of your life that are really unhealthy or sort of out of control, uh, that's not necessarily a good thing. It would be like someone saying, like, I'm going to go to, like, if you were to go to some kind of physical boot camp on some random Wednesday morning, and then every couple of weeks just do that, and otherwise are completely out of shape, like your risk of injury is a lot higher. So similarly, if you're taking in uh, astrological content somewhat regularly, but there's other areas of your life that are like really out of shape, um, that's gonna the way you end up experiencing and filtering that astrological content is going to provoke or increase anxiety. So these are some of the things that I would say. Students are where If you're an astrologer, then you're always a student. If you're a student, you may not know that you're a student. If you're a student, you need to have some distance between your own intake of astrology and your study of astrology. If you're an astrologer, you need to, same thing, you need to, if you're actual practicing astrologer, then you need some healthy differentiation between your student life, your practicing life, and the space in which you may even ask something of astrology for your own anxieties. The point of today's talk is not to map out exactly how to deal with all of this stuff, because it's an ongoing experience for me, but just to give people the idea that one of the reasons that astrological anxiety exists, especially in the modern world, is that these three roles, the astrologer who helps people feel the touch and mark of the symbol, is dedicated to the symbol; the querent, the one who is looking for the signs and reorientation, who needs to find them, who has forgotten them, who has some anxiety; and the student, the one who consciously or unconsciously is absorbing lots of astrological content, the one who is practicing astrology, asking something of astrology, and learning astrology. These are all complicated. They each have their own kind of like reality. And so understanding them and talking about them, becoming more aware of when you're in each different space in your relation to astrology, can really help to ease the burden of that astrological anxiety. Finally, this is the number one thing that can help ease if you're into astrology and it brings up anxiety for you, no matter which category you may identify with. Remember that ultimately the entire system of astrology is really built around the sun. And the sun is the light of the higher mind and of truth. If we don't have a higher image or images, a collection of them, personal images to move toward and embody as we study, practice, or consult with or for others, then we will not learn to read and follow the signs. Remember, in ancient astrology, the ninth house was called the joy of the sun, and the house was called God. Whether it's Jesus or the Buddha or Krishna or some other avatar or saint, um, we need the archetypal images of virtue in our lives, of the best possible person, or the best possible action or conduct or behavior, or the best possible version of ourselves. Even if you're an artist, the best possible artist, the ethical, beautiful artist, or whatever the case might be. We need the some sense of the ideal, eternal, higher self. And we need to be moving toward that constantly. And we need to be moving toward that in both good times and bad times, when we get what we want and when we don't get what we want, when we're afraid and attached to outcomes, and fearful of what will come, or when we're in the middle of receiving, we're in a real high in our life. We need to keep moving toward that image, not with some self-flagellating whip on the back, with steady, soft dedication, humble, but confident. When we move in that direction toward that truth, it naturally starts filling us with intelligence from within, and our anxiety doesn't go away, but we attend to it with care. We're confident even as we're anxious. We can be more things at once when we keep moving toward that. For some people, that might be a very religious and formal path. For other people, it's just attending to that sense of higher self that speaks to you from within your conscience. I believe spiritual practice is a really important part of it. I think we need the support of spiritual traditions and practices. So I'm a big, obviously I'm a big believer in the usefulness of that. But the point is that astrology is a solar practice. Why are we studying all of this? Because we're interested in the A Day, and we can see them in this world when we watch the patterns of nature, the cycles of the planets, the seasons of life playing out. They all are pointing us home, and they're all guiding us toward the best possible version of ourselves, our bodhisattva nature, if you want to say it like that, or something. And if we keep moving toward that as we study astrology and juggle these roles of being an astrologer versus being a querent versus being a student, the anxiety will lessen in time. And I'm very confident to say that, because that's what's happened for me, is I've just stuck to my practices every single day, my meditation, my prayer, my study of astrology, my sharing with you guys, my working with clients, my working with students. This is my spiritual practice. And the more that I've just stuck with it and kept going with it, my anxiety has dramatically lessened in my life. It's not gone. I still have it. I just have a different relationship with it. I feel marked and touched. I feel like I live in a symbolic reality. So I hope this series has been helpful for you guys. This lesson was easily the hardest for me to sort of capture and summarize neatly, because it's tough to talk about these three different positions that I feel like we're sometimes negotiating. But leave your comments for me in the comments section. How do you experience being in any of these positions? How do you navigate them? How do you weave them together? How do you separate them out? How do you deal with astrological anxiety? Maybe perhaps at some point down the road, we'll revisit this topic as new insights come up, because I can tell you that every year of my life of doing this, I've learned new things about these topics. So with that, very humbly submit to you this series. I hope that it was a good thing for all of you, and I hope you're having a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.